Hi, Jillian here from the land of midnight baking. It's time for our next installment in the technical challenge recipe review, and this time I am doing Paul Hollywood's Apricot Couronne. Now the Apricot Couronne is a sweet bread, and it's basically shaped like a crown. It's like a little wreath. So if you've watched the Great British Bake Off, you might remember that when the contestants had this particular technical challenge, they all did relatively well. The only thing they really had trouble with was how to shape the dough once they had rolled it out. The instructions were kind of confusing. Now, fortunately, I'm able to go on the website and get the actual recipe, but unfortunately, the instructions there are still kind of vague. However, the Great British Bake Off Masterclass is available on Netflix, and in this show, Paul actually does this apricot couronne recipe step by step, and he shows you how to roll out and shape this dough. So I followed his instructions when it came to that part. So let's see how it goes. We start with our dough. Now, Paul mixes it by hand, but he says you can use a mixer if you want to, and I wanted to. I added my bread flour to the mixer bowl, putting the yeast on one side and the salt on the other, as Paul instructs. I then added the butter, milk, and egg. I used my mixer with the paddle attachment to combine these ingredients into a sticky dough. Once the dough came together, I dumped it all out onto a floured surface and kneaded for 11 minutes, as directed by the recipe. It felt like a long time, and the dough got kind of stiff, so maybe I kneaded it too long, but that's what the recipe said to do, so The dough rested in an oiled bowl, covered with a tea towel for an hour. While that was happening, I prepared the filling in another bowl. I mixed the drained apricots with soft butter, brown sugar, flour, raisins, walnuts, and orange zest until it formed a fairly uniform filling. After the dough rested, it was supposed to have risen. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. My dough was disappointingly small and had hardly risen at all. Why did this happen? I don't know. But anyway, the show must go on. So I rolled the dough into a rectangle as directed by the recipe. I spread the filling evenly across the surface of the dough. Then it was time to shape the dough. First, I tacked down the dough on one long side of the rectangle. Then I began rolling the dough tightly, starting from the other side of the rectangle. Next, I rolled the log out to seal the seam and cut off the ends to make an even log. Then I carefully sliced the log lengthwise and opened it up. Okay, so this is the part that I got from the masterclass video. The language in the recipe is a little vague, so here's what you're supposed to do next. You're supposed to grab both ends and twist to make a kind of spiral shape, and then pull the two ends together and squeeze to make a wreath. So at this point, it's time to preheat the oven to 400 degrees, so I did. Now that the loaf is shaped, it has to rest another 30 to 45 minutes, covered once again with a tea towel. And once again, my dough didn't quite rise enough, and I never got it proofed correctly. It never sprang back like it's supposed to when it's proofed correctly. So I let it proof a little longer just to see if it would rise anymore, but no dice. So into the oven it went for 30 minutes. When the timer went off, I took the bread out and it was exactly the right color, even if the loaf was kind of small. While the bread was still warm, I glazed it with the warm apricot jam and drizzled it with icing, and then sprinkled crushed flaked almonds on top. I let it rest on the baking sheet to cool completely, and that's the finished product. Okay, so this is what it looks like when it comes out of the oven. You can see that it is the proper golden brown color, but it's not very big. It didn't rise in the oven. So I'm gonna try it. I don't know if it's supposed to be like that. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So you can see it's kind of dense. It didn't rise very much, but it still looks really good. Looks good. I'm gonna try it. It's got a nice crust. Tastes nice. Taste the orange. And taste the apricot. It tastes good. It's just not what I was expecting. It's nice. So there you have it. It tastes good. It just looks weird and it didn't rise very much. That's it for Paul Hollywood's Apricot Couronne. Dough rising issues notwithstanding, this was a pretty simple recipe to follow. Even the contestants were able to get a good loaf, even if they didn't quite shape it the right way. So I would recommend giving this a try. The bread turned out pretty good, it tasted good, even if the texture wasn't quite what I wanted it to be. If you're like me and you're not great with bread, this is a good recipe to try because even when it goes wrong, it still tastes good. So that's it for this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe below. Don't forget to check out the full review on my blog, which will also be linked below. And we will see you next time on Land of Midnight Baking. Bye. I would recommend that even if you aren't great with bread like me, no, hang on. If you aren't great with bread like I am, no, hang on. If you're like me and not great with bread, let me do that again.